my name is Lee, and when I was 20 years old, I came home for my college break expecting something familiar, something steady, maybe even comforting, only to arrive and find my belongings shoved into black trash bags and lined up on the porch like evidence of a life that had already been thrown away. Not long after I stood there trying to understand what I was seeing, my mom sent me a text that said, "Sorry, hon, I have a new boyfriend. We'd rather be alone." And instead of arguing with her, instead of begging or asking why or trying to talk her out of it, I chose a different response entirely, one that would eventually lead to her being handcuffed by the police 2 weeks later. And if you've ever felt that sharp, hollow betrayal that comes from people who were supposed to be your biggest supporters, the ones who were meant to protect you, then you probably already know exactly how this felt, and you can tell me where you're watching from. The trip home itself had already drained me, a 5-hour flight that didn't even include the layover or the frustrating delay that kept us stuck on the ground in Chicago for nearly an hour while they waited for clearance, and I spent most of that time watching old sitcoms with subtitles that barely matched the dialogue, my mind wandering as I distracted myself with thoughts of food, especially lasagna, my mom's lasagna, the one she always made whenever I came home, or at least the one she used to make back when coming home still meant something. I hadn't seen her in 5 months, and during the flight I built the moment up in my head, imagining a long hug at the door, maybe a tearful comment about how grown up I'd gotten, or even one of her familiar rants about gas prices or how college doesn't teach real-world survival skills, and oddly enough I found myself looking forward to all of it. Instead, when I finally arrived and dragged my suitcase up the familiar walkway, I felt something was off the second I saw our brand. New lock on the front gate, shiny and unfamiliar, and when I tried my key it didn't fit. I blinked, tried again, jiggled it like that might somehow change the shape of the metal, even though I knew it wouldn't, and when it still didn't work, confusion started creeping in. I pulled out my phone and texted my mom, "Hey, I'm here. Gates locked." But there was no response, so I rang the bell, waited, knocked, waited again, and nothing happened. And that's when I noticed the trash bags, 4 of them tied tightly at the top and lined neatly along the porch like someone had started a chore and abandoned it halfway through. At first, I told myself she must have forgotten to take them out, because that explanation felt easier than anything else, and I stepped around them carefully and tried again to get her attention. But there was still no response. When I called her phone, it went straight to voicemail, and I started making excuses for her silence, telling myself she was probably asleep, or maybe she had work early, or maybe she ran to the grocery store, or maybe I was just being paranoid and overthinking everything. I sat down on the porch bench and scrolled through Instagram, forcing myself not to feel annoyed or hurt. And after 20 minutes passed, I texted again, "Me, Mom," but still nothing came through. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed, and for a split second relief washed over me before confusion replaced it when I read, "Sorry, hun. We changed the locks, I have a new boyfriend, and we'd rather be alone." And that was it. No follow-up, no explanation, no apology, nothing. I stared at the screen like the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. And then another message followed saying she'd sent me something on Facebook a few days earlier. Facebook, the app I hadn't opened since high school, which felt about as effective as sending a message in Morse code. I called her, and she answered on the third ring with a casual "Hi, sweetie," like this was just a normal conversation. And when I told her I was at the house, she said she figured I'd get in touch and reminded me that I knew I was coming because things had changed. And when I laughed, it came out hollow as I pointed out that she'd changed the locks. She told me it wasn't personal, that she and Vincent needed space, that he was staying there and it was their little getaway, and that they just wanted to enjoy each other's company without distractions. And when I asked where I was supposed to go, she suggested staying with friends, even though I'd already told her most of them were out of town. After a brief pause, she mentioned she'd left my things on the porch, and when I glanced at the trash bags and asked if that was what she meant, She confirmed brightly that she'd packed them the day before, mostly clothes and a few books, adding that I didn't need much since I was only there for a week. There was a long silence after that, long enough for the weight of it to settle, and then she asked if I was still there, but I had already hung up. And when I opened one of the bags, I found my hoodie, my sneakers, and my framed senior prom photo still cracked from the move to college. Everything smelling faintly of lavender dryer sheets, a scent that somehow made the betrayal sting even more. I didn't cry then. I just stood there holding a trash bag full of my own belongings, feeling like I was moments away from being thrown away too. And eventually I found a hostel, the kind with peeling paint and bunk beds, checking in with the emergency card I kept tucked behind my ID so I wouldn't have to talk to anyone, showering in a coin-operated stall that blasted lukewarm water and made me question every decision I'd ever made, then climbing into a lumpy bottom bunk, pulling the thin sheet over my head, and trying to convince myself I was camping somewhere, even though the irony wasn't lost on me. The next morning I checked my college fund just to see how long I could afford to survive like this, and when the balance showed zero, I refreshed the page, closed the tab, reopened it, and checked again, but the number didn't change. That account had been my lifeline, built partly from my grandfather's inheritance and partly from 3 years of tutoring kids who barely understood what AP chemistry was. Money I'd saved by skipping meals and being careful, and now it was gone, and as I stared at the screen, my hands went cold, and for the first time since I'd come home, I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt scared. My mom had always believed in second chances and third chances and 15th chances too, especially if the guy had a good smile, nice teeth, and at least a halfway decent Spotify playlist, and growing up it felt like every few months there was a new man in our lives, and with him came a new set of rules. One wanted me to call him Dad. Even though I barely knew his last name, another insisted I leave the room whenever he was watching television like my presence was an inconvenience, and a third offered unsolicited advice about my posture until my mom dumped him the moment he insulted the couch, and that one still makes me laugh in a bitter way. It was always the same cycle. She'd fall hard and fast, rearrange our entire lives around whoever she was seeing at the time, and when it inevitably fell apart, she'd swing in the opposite direction and declare that she was done with men forever. She'd say it was just the two of us now, binge, watch old sitcoms with me, cook dinner every night, and step into the role of a sitcom mom herself, crying quietly during commercials and sometimes asking me if I thought she was unlovable, and then, almost like clockwork, another guy would appear, usually with a motorcycle or a deep V-neck, and suddenly everything would reset and we'd be right back on the merry, go around again. By the time I reached high school, I stopped waiting for things to stabilize because I'd learned they never would, and instead I focused on getting myself out. I got a job at a local bookstore, then picked up another one tutoring middle schoolers, knowing that if I wanted to go to college, it was going to be on me to make it happen. My mom always said she wished she could help, but between rent, groceries, and her deeply unfortunate taste in men, there was never anything left, and the only reason college became possible at all was because of my grandfather, my mom's dad, who didn't say much but saw far more than he ever admitted. When he passed away during my junior year of high school, he left me a college fund of $40,000 in a savings account set up in my name, and over time I added about $8,000 of my own, money earned through years of working and saving, and combined it was just enough to cover my tuition and most of my living expenses as long as I stayed careful. The account had been open for years, and my mom still had the password from when I was a minor, and I never changed it because I trusted her, because I wanted to believe that deep down she would always be on my side, even though experience should have told me otherwise. The morning after I arrived home to trash bags and betrayal, I didn't sleep in the hostel at all because the bed was itchy and my mind wouldn't slow down, and sometime between sunrise and my third cup of instant coffee, I logged into my account again, not even sure why, maybe just hoping that something in my life would still make sense, but the balance was still zero. I blinked, hit refresh, checked the transaction history, and saw that it was all gone, every last dollar transferred without any fraud alerts or warnings, just transactions initiated from the linked device, which of course was her phone. I didn't cry right away. Instead, I felt this heavy, sinking realization settle in as I stared at the screen. Feeling stupid in a deep, irreversible way, like I should have known better, like maybe if I stared long enough the numbers would change or the screen would correct itself and admit there had been a mistake. I tried to convince myself it might be a bank error or that I had logged into the wrong account, but then I remembered who had the password, who had hugged me goodbye when I left for college and told me how proud she was, who had smiled and said I didn't have to worry about money the way she did at my age. I called her and it rang 4 times before going to voicemail, so I didn't leave a message and tried again, and on the 6th call she finally picked up. "Lee, hi, sweetie." She said in the same casual tone she used when catching up with friends after brunch, and when she asked how I was settling in, my voice sounded strange even to me as I told her I'd seen the balance and that it was all gone. There was a brief pause before she said, "Oh, you mean the account, yeah, the one you weren't supposed to touch." Dragging my name out like it was, a sigh, telling me not to be so dramatic because it wasn't gone, it was just tied up. When I asked what that even meant, she explained that they'd used some of it for a little trip, nothing major, because Vince had found an incredible deal on a cruise, and not only that, but they were renovating the kitchen too because it needed work, and Vince's friend ran an amazing contracting business and gave them a great price, and once it was done, the value of the house would go way up. I reminded her that it was my college fund, that Grandpa had left it for me, and I had added my own money to it, and she told me not to worry because Vince was going to pay it all back, every cent, even though he was a little tied up with cash flow right now since most of his money was in investments, and when I told her I didn't care and that I wanted it back immediately, she accused me of being hysterical. I laughed then, not because anything was funny, but because I couldn't believe she was doing this again, twisting the situation, guilt, tripping me, and making it seem like I was the problem for setting boundaries. When I told her she had stolen from me, she scoffed and said that was such a strong word, insisting she'd only borrowed it and didn't think she needed to ask because she was my mother. I told her I was an adult, that the money was mine, and that emptying the account without permission was theft, and her tone shifted immediately as she told me not to speak to her that way. I told her I'd speak however I wanted because right now she wasn't acting like a mother. She was acting like a thief, and after a long silence she finally said she'd talk to Vince and send the money back, asking if that made me happy. I told her I'd be happy when the money was actually back in my account, and she muttered something about me overreacting before hanging up. I sat there on the edge of the hostel bed with my phone still in my hand and the screen dark, my heart pounding not just from anger but from something colder and heavier, because I knew a line had been crossed and there was no undoing it. She had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. I gave her 3 days after that, not because I truly believed she would fix it, but because somewhere deep in the fossilized layers of our relationship there was still a tiny flicker of hope that maybe, just once, she would do the right thing without needing chaos to force her hand. For 3 days straight, I refreshed my bank account the way people refresh group chats, expecting something, anything, but nothing ever changed. I texted her once to ask for an update, and she replied with a vague, "It's being handled," which meant absolutely nothing, and when I asked again on the 4th day, she didn't respond at all. On the 5th day, I sent a longer message explaining that I needed a timeline, that I had bills and rent and tuition, and that I needed to know when my money was coming back, and she left it on read. On the 6th day, I called her, and she picked up with that familiar tone she always used when she knew she was in the wrong, but hadn't yet decided how to spin it, telling me she was in the middle of something, and I told her I'd be quick, and that I needed my money back. She sighed and repeated that it was being handled, saying Vince would take care of it once his next investment paid out, and when I asked if she had actually asked him directly, there was a pause, followed by her insisting they had talked about it. I asked her if she had explicitly told him that she had taken $48,000 from her daughter and needed it returned, or if she had just vaguely mentioned being short on cash, and the silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. She accused me of starting drama, and told me I had no idea how hard the year had been for her, and I reminded her that I'd been working 2 jobs while going to school full-time, saving every dollar because I already knew she couldn't help me. She raised her voice and insisted she had wanted to help, saying she cried every time she saw me working those shifts, but I pointed out that she hadn't said a word when she took the money. She snapped back that she hadn't taken it, that it had been accessible, and that she hadn't spent it on anything bad, just the house and her future with Vince, something she described as beautiful, and when I laughed, she demanded to know what was so funny. I told her it was pathetic that she hadn't just spent my money but Grandpa's money too, the money he had left specifically for my education, and when she tried to remind me that she was my mother and that she was the one who now had to figure out how to stay afloat, I finally told her no, that I wasn't trusting her anymore and that I was done. She went quiet for a long moment before accusing me of doing this to her after everything she'd done for me, saying she had raised me and given up everything, and when I told her I was going to the police, she laughed and asked if I was serious, calling me ungrateful, and I told her I was just done being fooled before she hung up. I sat there for a moment and then started gathering everything, copying the messages where she admitted to taking the money, screenshotting my bank statements, adding a photo of the original check from my grandfather marked for my education, and then I walked to the nearest police station, waited my turn and handed everything over, bracing myself to become some whispered cautionary tale, only for the officer to calmly review the documentation, confirm the account was in my name, ask if she had power of attorney, and nod when I said she didn't. 3 days later, my phone rang and it was her, furious that I had called the police, insisting that Vince had a plan and that the renovations would make the house worth more. But I told her there was no plan, no receipts, no contract, just a gamble, and when she accused me of being cold and sick, family members thought I'd lost my mind. I told her I was done, and that if she wasn't going to fix it, the police would handle it. The investigation moved forward and things unraveled quickly, with officers showing up while she was getting ready for what she called a wine and charcuterie night, her indignation escalating into threats that earned her handcuffs, and the aftermath filled with tearful voicemails that focused more on her embarrassment than the harm she had caused. When family members reached out, I shared the truth plainly, screenshots and statements without commentary, and eventually the noise died down as the facts spoke for themselves. She was ordered to repay the money or face charges, and while she stalled at first, reality caught up to her when Vince disappeared along with the renovation money, leaving behind no permits, no contractors, no receipts, and no real identity. She remortgaged the house under terrible terms, sent $20,000 upfront, and set up enforced monthly payments through a third party, and now those payments arrive like clockwork, covering my books, my groceries, and my future. She doesn't call anymore, and I don't rewrite her story for her, because I'm no longer her backup plan, her therapist, or her excuse, just her creditor, and sometimes I still wonder if I was too harsh or if I should have shown more grace. But then I remember that I didn't scream or seek revenge. I simply set a boundary and held it, and maybe that was the first real act of self-respect I ever learned.